Cool, guys. It looks like we are live and ready to go. Going to go ahead and start off with the live stream for Sunday at the Waste Management Phoenix Open. Going to be covering the weather for tomorrow, our player pool, ownership, and of course, any of your live questions to get you prepared for that single round slate. So let's go ahead and hop right on into it because we have quite a bit to discuss for this Sunday showdown. Of course, placement points going to be a part of the picture, as always, for our Sunday showdown. And the weather, back to what we're used to seeing. You can see for tomorrow, right around when they're starting off around 9-10 a.m. Actually, don't quote me on that. I'm not sure of the tee times. Because of the Super Bowl, they might be starting closer to 7 or 8 a.m. Typically, that's the case. That's what they try to do to get everyone out of there before the Super Bowl ends. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Either way, though, the conditions don't really change throughout the day. You can see right around 7 a.m., you have 5 to 6 miles an hour at the most. Around 10 a.m., if they are starting a little bit later, it's a little bit higher, right? 6 to 8 miles an hour, but nothing close to the 15 to 25 miles an hour gusts that they saw today, which we'll get to the data here in a second, actually didn't make that much of a difference with the scoring. They still went out there and took the place relatively low. At 12 p.m., you see it's about 6 to 9 miles an hour. And when they'll be finishing up, which will be at 3 p.m. at the max, down to 5-6 miles an hour. So overall, the weather not going to be a factor tomorrow. And in terms of the scoring conditions today, you see it actually played slightly easier than it did yesterday, which was surprising. I expected it to be a little bit higher over par. In the morning, you can see obviously there weren't morning and afternoon waves. It was slightly easier than the afternoon. So when the course started to bake out, when the wind was still there, it wasn't really more strong in the afternoon, but as it made the course drier, made it more firm and more fast, the sun does the same thing as well. It did get slightly more difficult. And I do expect that same type of effect to happen from round 3 to round 4. So in total, we had about 1.12 strokes under par being the scoring average. I would expect it to be close to 1 under par, right? Not much of a difference there. It's not going to make a huge difference for our modeling, but there are certainly some good scores out there. Let's go ahead and hop over to a little bit of a player pool perspective. And as always, the ownership, the pricing for Sunday Showdown is always a little bit wonky. It comes out early in the day. Of course, ownership is going to heavily swing behind some of these guys at the top of the board because of the placement points. So there's a lot of game theory to talk about. I can see Tom's already talking about how this is going to be a tough showdown slate. Yeah, especially with all these studs up top, right? A lot of the guys that are the best players in the field, of course, are the guys at the top of the board. So it makes it a little bit of a tougher slate to break down, but we're going to go ahead and go through it. And who are my top 2 favorite guys for Showdown tomorrow? We'll get to that here in a second. I'm not going to spoil the beans before we get into the player pool. We'll go through it first, and then we'll touch on that type of stuff. And Steven likes Hoagie. That's good to know, man. We'll touch on it here in a second. I'm not really sold on him. He's going to be super chalky tomorrow because he's 11 under par. And usually when you have guys that are lower pedigree players towards the top of the board, I fade them a lot more often than not. They're just not the best players in the world. And if anybody's likely to regress back to their average, it's those players, right? Players like a Patrick Cantlay, Justin Thomas, Jon Rahm, they are much more likely to continue that type of play. So we'll get to that. You have to take that on a case-by-case basis because there's certainly times where there's guys like that, like a Sahith Theegala, for example, that I will be playing because he's in first place. He has shown some really good form, and we might actually be able to buy in early on him. So we'll talk about that on a case-by-case basis, but personally not as big on Tom Hoagie. Jon Rahm at the top of the board. I ran my projections, right? This keeps in mind placement points. It keeps in mind position on the board, also what other people are positioned on the board, everything like that. And he's still my top projected player in the world, which really shouldn't be surprising to you guys. Sure, he's starting a little bit further down the board, but in terms of its scoring average, I have him scoring without placement points 6.7 more points than the next highest player on the board. If you take placement points into consideration, obviously that makes guys like a Patrick Cantlay, Xander Schauffele, Brooks Koepka slightly better options. But from a pure upside standpoint, I think Jon Rahm still has it, right? Because he goes out there, he shoots 7 or 8 under par tomorrow, which is more than possible. I mean, Scottie Scheffler nearly shot 9 under par today. He could easily wind up in the optimal lineup. So he's not somebody I'm willing to exclude from my player pool, particularly because he's coming lower owned than most of these guys up top. I mean, he's lower owned than a Justin Thomas. Actually, not Justin Thomas. Sorry, misread that there. Patrick Cantlay, also Hideki Matsuyama. Same thing with Xander, Brooks, and Scheffler. They're all going to be higher owned from the world's best player. And sure, I get they have a 3-4 stroke lead on Jon Rahm, but placement points are far from everything in Showdown. It's what people really like to hunker down on. They feel like they have to take the top 6 guys on the leaderboard to win in Showdown, and that's not the case. Actual scoring is a lot more important than placement points. Placement points are what break ties, right? If both players shoot 6 under par, that type of thing, then you're going to need the guy that's higher on the leaderboard. But if Jon Rahm, again, goes out there and has that ceiling type of round, that is more than enough to crack the optimal lineup. So he is somebody I'll be taking a chance on. This is the first time I'll be playing Patrick Cantlay this entire week. He's not somebody that I've been on for 4-round stuff or for any of our Showdown. A lot of it comes down to how he played with the irons. He looked a lot better on Saturday. In fact, he actually missed a lot of short putts. He had a few putts for par that he missed, a few birdie putts from less than 10 feet. And if he cashes those in like he typically does, he could have had a really solid round today. So I liked to see that little bit of a resurgence from a Patrick Cantlay. Of course, the reason why he was a fade for us in the first 3 rounds is he hadn't looked good with the iron play. He hadn't really shown that to us. So that was good to see from him. I mean, a little bit further down the board, Hideki Matsuyama, as I said, he's going to shoot 3 or 4 under par every single day. And that's not enough for Showdown. It wasn't enough for today for Showdown, and I don't expect it to be on Sunday. The only reason he's a slightly more intriguing today than he was yesterday is because of the placement points, right? If he shoots 4 under par, he's probably going to finish in the top 5. So once again, he'll be somebody that will be targeting in cash. But for GPP type of builds, I don't think he's the guy to go to, as I didn't think he was today. Jordan Spieth, we played him in Showdown today. I'll show you guys my Draftkings lineups after we get out here. I still ended up cashing in every single lineup. We had a ton of Fitzpatrick, a ton of Scotty Scheffler. So even though Jordan Spieth, who I had in 50% of my lineups, went out and had a pretty horrible day, he still had those 2 eagles. So I'll give him that, right? In terms of scoring, still put up plenty of fantasy score. Just had a ton of bogeys mixed in as well. So he kind of limited his potential there. Was far from an optimal play because of those bogeys. But good to see him that he was out there eagling, right? He hit an iron shot from 250 yards to about 2 feet. So the iron play is certainly still there for Jordan Spieth. The price tag is more than fair at $9,100. The only issue I really have with him, of course, is just the placement position, right? He's -2. Even if he has an 8 or 9 under par round, he's not going to crack the top 10, which means that he really has to have that 8, 9, 10 under par round to even be in consideration for the optimal lineup, because his placement points are going to be capped at maybe 5 to 6 for this event. So there is a limit to how far down the board I'll be willing to go. Of course, Jon Rahm, he's only 5 strokes off the lead at this point. 11 strokes, a little bit too much to swallow. So he will be a fade, even though he's one of my favorite players in the world. And you'll see that we can't play everyone up top. So I think this is what Tom was referring to when he said this is a really tough slate for when it comes to Showdown. It's because of this. You can't play everyone up top. There's no way to. You don't have enough room in your player pool. Even if you play 150 lineups, there's no way to get leverage on all these guys up top, not even close to it. So guys like Xander Schauffele, you can see he's in my player pool, but an unfortunate casualty is going to be somebody like a Brooks Koepka, who has looked great to this point of the week. I love the price tag on him, but he's super high owned. Same thing with Xander Schauffele, same thing with a Scotty Scheffler. And we can play at most 2 of the 3. So the 2 that I'll be choosing will be Scotty Scheffler and Xander Schauffele. I think they make the most sense. Scheffler looks like an absolute boss today. He came in at 6% ownership. Again, I told you guys I thought he was going to be chalk, right? Even though he hadn't played well on Friday, he was still -3. He looked really good on day 1. I expected people to go back to him, and boy, am I glad they did not. I had 60% Scotty Scheffler in my lineups, and every lineup I had Scotty Scheffler, and I'm going to show you guys my lineups after we get off here, had Molinari in it. So I really had all the keys to the GPP. I also had Fitzpatrick in a bunch of those lineups. Garrick Higo was absolutely balling in them. But of course, Francesco Molinari, who absolutely laid an egg today. So it is what it is. But it looks like CBO says you did a spectacular job on your poll players. Keep up the good work. Hey, appreciate that, man. I saw down in the Discord that you hit today. That was good to see. And Steven says, great call on the Scheffler for today. Yeah, man. He was my favorite play for yesterday. I definitely like him for tomorrow as well. Today's version of Scotty Scheffler, so somebody that's being a little bit under-owned that I think could really have a big day. We have to go a little bit further down the board to get to it, but it's a Keith Mitchell, right? He's at 9 under par. He's 4 strokes off the lead. And just because he's not in the double digits, there's that whole psychology factor where people think he's further back than he actually is. If he was 10 under par right now, he'd probably be closer to 20, 22% owned. But you can see he's approaching the single digit range. So He's tomorrow's Scotty Scheffler, somebody that could shoot 7 or 8 under par at relatively low ownership. But let's go ahead and hop back into the player pool. So we talked about some of the guys up top. We talked about how we can't play everyone in this 9K range, or of course the guys in the 10K range. But the guys that we were really honing in on, of course, Jon Rahm. We talked about Patrick Cantlay. Xander Schauffele makes a whole lot of sense. He was ball striking the absolute crap out of it today. And of course, Scotty Scheffler, we're going to look to ride that form. This is a perfect course fit for him. I said before the week, I think this is a course that he could very well end up winning his first tour event at. Somebody I fired an outright bet on in that fashion. So I'm hoping that happens. I'll be playing him on Sunday. It's a little bit of a homer pick there. I mean, obviously I want him to come through for the outright. But I do think that in terms of the metrics, right, projection 5.23x value in terms of points per dollar. That's one of the best numbers on the board, right? That's why we really like Patrick Cantlay. That's why Jon Rahm is one of the best players on the board. And of course, why we'll be targeting Xander Schauffele. Moving down a little bit further, Bubba Watson, I don't really need to get back there. We played him yesterday in a few lineups. He's volatile. He's a really good ball striker. He hit multiple iron shots to 2-3 feet today. And that's the only reason he went out and scored. So as much as I was able to take advantage of that, as much as we liked seeing that, not necessarily repeatable. I mean, he hit most of those iron shots were out of bunkers too. He was hitting out of fairway bunkers, hitting them to like 2 feet. I don't want to say that he got lucky, but he did. You can only get so lucky out of those bunkers from time to time. So that's what we got to say there. Moving down a little bit further, we have Matt Fitzpatrick at $8,800. I don't see a reason to play him. He had also a really good day today. Again, also somebody I was well over the field on, particularly in those windy conditions. But for Sunday Showdown, where we're not going to have that wind in play, I don't think he's nearly as strong as a play, particularly at the type of ownership I have him projected for, which is nearly twice what we had for Saturday. A little bit further, we got Adam Scott. He was an all right play today. He started off really solid, ended up kind of faltering towards his second 9. I don't hate the play, right? I have him down as a no right here. You can see in terms of points per dollar projection, he is somebody that's kind of popping, especially compared to his peers, right? He's a pretty solid projection compared to Corey Connors, Russell Henley, and Tom Hoagie. So I could see myself getting to him, but again, there's only so many players that we can play with super high ownership on some of these guys up top. To get any type of significant leverage in DFS, you're looking at having to give 35, 40% exposure to some of these guys up here at 16%, 45, 50, 55% even to some of these guys at 20, 25% ownership, which is going to eat up at least 2-3 of your roster spots with these guys up top, which means that some of these guys in the lower 8K range, unless you like them a lot more than these studs up top, so this is a little bit of strategy discussion at this point, you can't really play them, right? So there's guys that I like in this 8K range, like a Billy Horschel, for example, a Taylor Gooch, Max Homa, right? That guys that I think project well, that I'm not going to be able to use as core plays, right? Because I have to kind of bypass the middle 8K range to the top of the 8K range to try and fit in 1 or even 2 of these guys into the same lineup. So that's going to be my main strategy. We'll talk about that later on when we're constructing lineups. But even though I have these guys down as yeses, they're not going to be like 30, 40% plays for me. Those are restricted for the guys up top. These are just people that I'm more mixing in, 10 to 15% exposure at the very most for somebody like a Horschel or a Taylor Gooch. Moving down a little bit further, Max Homa's at a great spot on the leaderboard to pounce. If he goes out there, shoots 4 or 5 under par tomorrow, could very well crack the optimal lineup. Keith Mitchell, we already talked about, one of my favorite plays in the slate. Brian Harman's at least a decent spot on the leaderboard. He's a good ball striker. Russell Knox, same story, right? 6 under par, close to that 7 under par mark. Really good ball striker. Guys that I like a little bit more, though, that I actually have in my player pool. Adam Hadwin starting towards the top of the leaderboard. He makes a lot of sense at 11 under par. Similar story to some of these other guys that we were talking about, like a Max Homa, like a Taylor Gooch. If he goes out there and shoots something like 3-4 under par today, could end up cracking the optimal lineup. As opposed to somebody like a Chris Kirk, for example, right? If he has that same type of round, he's not going to be getting those extra 4 or 5 placement points like somebody like an Adam Hadwin will, that'll be jumping himself into the top 5. That's worth an extra birdie. So for Chris Kirk to be optimal over somebody like an Adam Hadwin, he's going to have to make an additional 2 birdies on the day. That's assuming they have the same amount of pars and bogeys, that type of thing. That's something to note here. That's why it's so important to target some of these guys that are at least in a relatively competitive position on the leaderboard. And of course, to consider their course fit, right? Because just because somebody's towards the top of the leaderboard doesn't mean that they're an amazing play. That's why we're not playing Alex Noren, for example. Alex Noren, not the best ball striker. And that's really what we're looking for at TPC Scottsdale. So even though he is towards the top of the leaderboard, you do have to keep that in mind. It's also why we're fading some of these guys like Tom Hoge, right? So I talked about that a little bit before, how I wasn't super sold on a Tom Hoge. It's because of the course fit. He's not very good off the tee. Historically, actually a loser. His shots gained off the tee. The approach play is excellent. He's always been one of the better wedge players on tour, but this is a long iron golf course. This is where you're hitting 5-6 irons on almost every single hole. This isn't a wedge fest like what we saw where he won over there at Pebble Beach. So a much different course fit there. I love the recent form at the very least. But that's also why he's coming in near 20% owned, right? That's chalk for this slate. So there's decisions you have to make on every single player in the pool that aren't black and white. That's the point of me going through that right there. Everything has to be done on an individual basis. We'll take a break here, go down to chat for a second. Continental says, who will be the outright winner? I hope it's Scheffler because I have the outright bet on him. If I had to guess, let me see. I mean, the true answer here, right, is going to be Patrick Cantlay, maybe Xander Schauffele, right? Those would be the two favorites by far. I hope Scottie Scheffler ends up winning. The only other guy I really think has a legit shot to win, like let's say higher than like a 10-15% chance, is Brooks Koepka. He's probably right around that same type of range. Between those 4 or 5 players, you're looking at least half the win equity, I would say. I don't think it's impossible for one of these guys like a JT, a John Rahm, guys that are in that 8, 9, 10 under range to have the round of their lives and win this golf tournament. But when you have guys like a Patrick Cantlay towards the top of the leaderboard, Xander Schauffele, Brooks Koepka, Scottie Scheffler, it's not going to be very often where one of them doesn't have a round like that, right? Doesn't go out there, shoot 7 or 8 under par. So that's why I think one of them is going to win. And Shot Like Harn says, you've been getting shit on Golf DFS. Hey, maybe you need to come by for these live streams, man. It seems like the community's been doing pretty damn good of late. So a lot of bright minds here that can help you out, man. So do not be afraid at all to ask questions. Anyone that you're wondering on, everyone here is willing to help. CBO says, wow. Tom says, Xander, please. Yeah, I love Xander. Absolutely agree it. And then Continental says, yeah, can't hold it. No, I don't think he's going to win. Yeah, I'm going to be playing him in DFS. I think he could have a decent round, but with all those guys coming up behind him, yeah, I don't see it, man. And yeah, he started falling apart late. You could see even early on, if you guys were watching the early coverage, he double bogeyed, I believe, one of the first 3 holes of the golf tournament. He bogeyed 5 or 6 as well. And he made his birdies today, right? So he kept himself in the tournament with a bunch of birdies today. Yeah, I don't see him holding it off. That's for sure. It's I hope he does. I mean, that would be a really good story, but not with all these guys coming behind him. It's and he has to sleep on that lead tonight, right? And he knows he's going to be playing with Brooks Koepka tomorrow. He's going to have all those guys behind him. Yeah, man, I'm not so sure he's going to hold it off. It would be pretty cool if he did. Let's move a little bit further down the board. I know we talked about a bunch of these middle tier options. You can see there's a dead range here. We talked about this a little bit before. These guys are starting way far down the board. You can see there's guys that are over par, 3, 7 under par. Most of them are relatively short hitters. We talked about how I didn't really like Alex Noren there. Brendan Grace, Ortiz, just too far down the leaderboard. They don't really have realistic chances of finishing in the top 10. I don't think they have to finish in the top 10, but you're taking a pure flyer play at this point on these guys, right? They have to shoot 7 or 8 under par to crack the optimal lineup, which is a top 2% type of performance, right? For some players, maybe that's the top 5 percentile type of performance. But for your average PGA Tour player, that's something that they're going to do once, maybe twice every 3 to 4 months at the best. And those would be some of the more volatile players on tour. So that's why we're not really putting a lot of stock behind them. If you're playing 150 lineups, I will not be playing 150 lineups for tomorrow. That's when you can start to mix in some of these guys a little bit more. Right? Volatile players like a Carlos Ortiz, a Francesco Molinari, even going to somebody like a Brendan Todd, you can make birdies in bunches. That's when they become useful. If you're playing single entry, or in my case, likely 5 to 7 lineups, something in that range for tomorrow's slate, I'm using most of my money for DFS tomorrow and the Super Bowl. I think that makes a lot of sense, guys. So that's why we're only playing 5 to 7 lineups there. Guys like that just aren't a priority. I don't need to have them in my pool. Adam Hadwin, we talked about. I like him. He's a really solid ball striker. Sahith Theegala is going to be mega chalk. I think this 23.2% might actually even be a little bit low. So if you want to take the game theory perspective, you think he completely blows up tomorrow, by all means, go ahead and fade him. But I think he shoots something respectable, like 2-3 under par, gets to 17, 18 under, posts a top 5 finish, that type of thing. Maybe ends up being in the top 3. But like I said, I expect him to get caught by one of those studs. One of those studs is going to post a special round, which is unfortunately going to take him out of the lead. But for DFS, not a problem. He's going to be getting 10 to 12 placement points. If he can put up a 3 to 4 under round, that's going to be enough there. Garrett Higo makes quite a bit of sense at $6,700. Obviously, we rode him to success today. I told you guys he's one of the more volatile players on tour, but he was also coming in with good recent form, also a relatively good course fit. So we'll be riding that same type of form. Pan Kazire, this guy, for whatever reason, if you look up his Sunday scoring, he averages 68.7. That's a whole shot and a half better than the rest of his game for Thursday through Saturday, I suppose. So $7,400. He's a Sunday specialist. We've seen it time and time again. Pan Kazire just backdoors a top 5 on Sunday. He goes out there, shoots 7 or 8 under par, and he's on an intriguing part of the leaderboard, right? He's 9 under par. He's had a pretty solid tournament to this point. So if he goes out there and has a solid Sunday, could finish in the top 5 very realistically. Could see another one of those patented Pan Kazire comebacks. And lastly, the last guy on the board I'm going to, you can see there's not really anyone in this lower 6K range I really feel comfortable at all getting to. The lowest price guy would be Rory Sabatini, though. He's at 9 under par. He's relatively close to the lead. And he's somebody who's been around for a while, right? He's got a lot of experience. He's not going to have those Sunday nerves like a bunch of these younger players will, like a JT Poston, for example, who's really, really been struggling of late. And I'm a huge JT Poston guy. Again, I've talked to this guy on Zoom before. He's one of the nicest guys I've ever talked to in terms of tour players. And I really hope that he does well. But he's also somebody who literally hasn't made many cuts over the last 6 months. I believe it's been 3 total. So for him to be in contention, if he even gets close to that lead, I don't think it's going to end well for him, right? I hope he ends up playing well, but look at the recent form, guys. Out of 132 players in the field, he's in the bottom 6 in every category. That's just as bad as it can get. I mean, guys that we literally have never seen before earlier on in the week had better rankings than him. So it's an issue, right? I mean, up here, right? Harry Higgs, pretty similar story. At least he's a little bit better in terms of his recent form. The course fit, certainly not what we're looking for. Let's go ahead and talk some strategy now, though. So we went through the player pool. Again, for Sunday Showdown, because I'm only playing 5 to 7 lineups, I'm not going to have 30 to 40 players as I normally would. But let's go ahead and just give you guys an idea of what we're going to go through. Here we go. We'll touch on chat before we get into it. Tom says, I have 600 on. Are you talking about Xander? I think you're talking about Xander, right? Because you were talking about the outright there. Hey, I hope he wins for your case then, because my outright is a lot lower than that. I have $30 on Scotty Scheffler to win, so it'd be nice, right? It's a little $700 payout, but you're almost betting more than what I'd win. So let's go ahead and we'll root for you there. Yeah, I think the rookie will fall apart likely. If he doesn't, the kid's legit, and we got to look out for him going forward. That's for sure. And you have a lineup down here we'll touch on before we hop into this little bit of strategy review. All right. So I was reading your lineup there. It looks pretty solid. So I like the fact that you have some of those studs up top. And I also like the fact that it's relatively balanced. I mean, obviously you have Scotty and Xander, who's able to take 2 of those stud options, but they're also not the guys in the 10K range. They're also not guys, they're chalky, right? So I'll give them that Scotty Scheffler and Xander are going to be chalky. But outside that, it's relatively unique, right? Keith Mitchell, Brian Harman, Russell Knox. I could see myself playing that type of lineup. I also like the fact that you have Adam Hadwin there too, right? He's one of those kind of middling players. He's close to the top of the board. He's relatively chalky, but he's not the chalkiest guy on the board, right? He's not somebody like a Tom Hoagie. He's not one of these guys that's like 25, 30% owned. So I like that lineup a whole lot, especially for a GPP. So it does depend what type of contest you're in. Let's go ahead and start making a lineup though. So like I said before, I'm going to try and fit in as many of these studs as possible, just because they're head and shoulders better than the guys in the 8K range. I mean, I'd say the drop off from the Scheffler Oosthuizen range here, from the $93, $9,200 range down to even just $8,800, $8,700 is really closer to like a $2,000, $2,500 difference in reality. I mean, you could easily have all these guys priced in the $10,000, $11,000 range. These guys price it the prices that they are, and it would be fair based on like their projections of what we expect for tomorrow. And of course, their positions on the leaderboard. So trying to fit in as many as possible is going to make sense. It's also going to be what everyone else in the field is doing. But I do think it's the optimal play. I don't think that we need to try and deviate off of that. So rather than taking a lineup construction approach to differentiating our lineups, we're going to have to do it the old-fashioned way. We're going to have to make sure that we're taking some of those lower-owned pivots down low. So a little bit more of a typical DFS strategy we're going to be implementing here. So let's go ahead and start it off. I told you guys before, I really like Scotty Scheffler. I also really do like Keith Mitchell. So believe it or not, Keith Mitchell is going to be the first man in. He's literally my favorite play on the slate. I don't think he's going to be the highest scoring player on the slate, but for his ownership, for the projection that I have on him, one of the best plays from there. At the top of the board, let's start off with a Patrick Cantlay. Let's go ahead and see what one of these lineups will look like. He is a little bit more expensive than we'd like, but he's going to be less chalky than a Brooks Koepka, a Scotty Scheffler, or even a Xander Schauffele that's cheaper. I am okay taking one of those options. Let's go ahead and just put Scotty Scheffler in here for shits and gigs. Like I said before, I'm okay taking one of those extremely chalky guys. And that puts us at $7,500 remaining per player, which really isn't all that bad. We can probably even try to fit in another one of these studs. So one that would really come to mind, I think Max Homa makes a lot of sense. He's at a great spot of the leaderboard. I do think that he's going to get his fair amount of ownership, but we'll have to differentiate with these last two spots. We'll have to see what this looks like. So we are at a spot now where we have four relatively chalky plays with Keith Mitchell, more middling rather than chalky, I'd say. But we have to really pick our spots now. We really have to try and differentiate ourselves and do it in a relatively intelligent way as well. So one might want to try and take an Adam Hadman. It might be a little bit too expensive anyways, but he would be mega chalky. He wouldn't fit that role for us. A little bit further down the board, Brian Harman might be somebody to consider. I know Tom had him in his lineup. He's not going to be chalk, so he could be somebody to consider. Pat Kazire, I already told you he's going to be one of my favorite plays in the slate. He's also going to be middling in terms of his ownership. I think he's the perfect pick here because he has enough upside for us in these large field tournaments. He's starting at a respectable place enough on the leaderboard. And again, he's going to be sub 10% ownership. So that's a great spot right there. And that leaves us at $6,800. I think Garrett Higo would be the chalky option down here. Because we are taking Kazire and Mitchell, we might be able to get away with using a Garrett Higo there. Let's go ahead and weigh our options. I do think it probably makes sense to take him in this circumstance because our pivots, our best pivot would be a Scott Stallings there at -8. We could consider going to Rory Sabatini, who I talked about a little bit before. But as I look at this, I weigh options. It would be Garrett Higo that I go with. It's leaving $100 on the table, which isn't really helping us in terms of being unique. Might slightly help us, if at all. But really counting on Kazire and Mitchell to make this lineup unique. So we'll have to see tomorrow. I'm going to enter this lineup. Every time I show one of these on stream, by the way, you can count that I'm entering it because there's a reason why. This is the exact type of process that I go through when I'm trying to make my lineups by hand. And tomorrow for my 5 to 7 lineups, I will be making them by hand. So this is very likely to be one of them. Don't dupe me. If you're going to enter this lineup, go ahead and just change one of them, please. I don't really feel like sharing first place with 5 of you. If we do, whatever, go ahead. But that's what we're going to have for a GPP lineup. As we said before, trying to fit in as many of those studs as possible, but at the same time, avoiding the guys at the bottom of the 6K range. I mean, it's just a complete shit show down here. I mean, guys starting at the bottom of the leaderboard, guys that don't have the best skill set for this golf course. So that's the strategy we're going to go with. Let's move over to a cash build. Like I said, we want to try and take as much ownership as possible. So taking a Xander Schauffele, taking a Brooks Koepka, taking a Scotty Scheffler together, most likely the optimal build. Just take the 3 chalkiest guys on the slate, put them together in a lineup, and you can move on from there. Go ahead and try to find some of these other chalky options. Of course, the Heath Theegala would go to the top of the list there. Perhaps you can swap out a Scotty Scheffler and go with a Theegala just to make our lineup a little bit more balanced. A few other options that would make a whole lot of sense. Max Homa is going to be really chalky. Tom Hoge is too. Given the price range that we have here at $7,400, might make a little bit more sense to go with Hoge. Adam Hadman's going to be relatively chalky, and that puts us at $6,300, which this might not be ideal. We may have to pivot. It's looking like we are. Let's go ahead and pivot off of a Tom Hoge. That's all right. Another popular option up top we could use as a substitute. I mean, Garrett Higo is going to be relatively chalky. Yeah, let's go with that. So if we use Garrett Higo, you can also take Alex Noren. So this is the type of lineup that I would be using in cash. Just a bunch of the chalky guys towards the top of the leaderboard. You definitely want to be taking Sahith Theegala. He's first place. He's going to be one of the chalkiest guys on the slate. And I think you almost have to play Xander Schauffele because he's nearly 25% owned, because he's starting so close to the top of the leaderboard. Probably same thing with Brooks Koepka. Again, he's starting in second place. They're almost must plays on cash. These other three options, Higo, Hadwin, and Noren, you could interchange, right? If there's guys that you like better than the others, go ahead and play them. You don't have to focus on the chalk for those three plays. That's all I've got here for the live stream for Sunday. Not going to go ahead and drag this out. I appreciate you guys coming by, enjoying the content and whatnot. Good luck for all of your Sunday lineups. We're going to have even more content coming for next week at Riviera. The Genesis Invitational is one of the higher end events in all of the PGA Tour schedule. So we're going to see an equally strong field there. So looking forward to that. The golf course might not be quite as exciting, but in terms of how nice it is, in terms of how difficult Riviera is, some may say that it's a better golf course, at least from an architecture standpoint. I would say so. It puts a lot of more thought into your golf shots. And again, it doesn't have this final 3-hole stretch like what we have at the Waste Management, which from a viewing experience makes it a whole lot of fun. But from a strategy and golf nerd perspective, Riviera is like one of the crown jewels in the world. So I'm looking forward to that. Of course, we have the Florida swing after Riviera. We're going to have the Honda API Players Championship Valspar, which I'll be at for every single event. So again, look forward to all of that. I'm going to have reports from the ground. I can heckle your favorite player if you guys want out there. Me and my buddies will cause a little bit of ruckus out there. But I appreciate you guys stopping by as always. Again, good luck with all of your lineups. Make sure to like the video and subscribe if you guys haven't already. And I'll see you guys next time.